Look, I'm not saying it's great, but it's got a lot more going for it than everybody seems to think. Yeah, hi, I feel like I'm going crazy. I seem to be in the minority in thinking The Last of Us Season 2 is actually pretty good, which, hey, whatever, I don't mind holding an unpopular opinion, but I can't be the only person out there who thinks this, right? This season is getting absolutely dogpiled online, and while there are some very valid reasons to dislike how this season turned out on the whole, it seems like a lot of the criticism it's receiving is either unjustified, in bad faith, or just not addressing the real issues at the root of this story. Apart from the last episode, which granted is pretty awful and pulls down the rest of the season as a result, I really vibed with most of what this season is going for. If you hated it, not that I don't see where you're coming from, but I respectfully disagree. So let's talk about how this show decides to adapt its difficult source material into something pretty new and interesting. And even if I can't win you over to my side, I hope I can at least convince you that this season has a bit more going on than it's getting credit for. The first Last of Us has been one of my favorite video games since I first played it in 2016. The gameplay isn't super innovative compared to some of developer Naughty Dog's other titles, but it has one of the best stories ever told in the gaming medium. So obviously I was super excited when it got adapted into an HBO original series. And while it's not perfect, I think it improves the narrative of the original story on the whole. The already great world building of the game gets expanded in some really cool ways, and all of the changes and additions the show makes helps to flesh out these characters in dynamic new lights. I now prefer how a lot of these characters' TV counterparts are written compared to their in-game versions because of how well realized and nuanced their performances are. And even if some of their characterizations are different than the game intended, these changes all act as smart adaptations that better suit these characters in their new format. In doing this, HBO created an overall really solid season of television. Not to mention just one of the best episodes of TV I've ever seen with the Bill and Frank episode. Tears, dude. Streaming down my face every time. The show has some tonal and pacing issues, and the weird lack of infected and a few other strange adaptational choices keep it from being as sensational as it could be, but its highs are so high that it makes a lot of its low points seem pretty trivial by comparison. The second game is a lot more complicated, so HBO was fighting a losing battle the moment they decided to ever adapt the first game. The Last of Us Part 2 is a messy, overly long piece of work that certainly tries to say a lot of profound things, but its messages are so muddled and clash with the gameplay so hard that it all just comes out kinda meh. There are some jaw-dropping standout moments to it, and I really like what it's going for, but for every great moment, there are 2 or 3 more that are just confusing. So many of its characters and plotlines are packed with promise, but for me, they all end up feeling distractingly half-baked. I barely cared about most of the game's new characters, even though I desperately wanted to, because it didn't feel like I was ever given a good reason to care. And the story structural issues are so bad that the first half of the game almost intentionally feels underwritten just to make the second half more interesting. And while this game also faced a lot of bad faith criticism both before and after its release, it's hard not to say that it's, at the very least, a lot more contentious than the first game. It's definitely a ballsy way to make a sequel. I really admire its ambition, and I'll always take a sequel that tries something new even if it doesn't end up panning out to be perfect. But this story has serious issues in its execution that needed addressing. And in my opinion, HBO did just that. For the most part. Let's get most of the bad stuff out of the way first. The most glaring flaw with Season 2 comes down to how its story is structured. The game is basically split into 3 distinct parts. The first 10 hours are devoted to Ellie's story, the second 10 hours are Abby's, and the last 5 hours are an epilogue to resolve both sides. As cool of an idea as this is on paper, in execution, it doesn't really work. Had they split the chapters of the game up so that every couple hours you played as one or the other character, I feel like it would have flowed a lot more naturally. But as is, that harsh split alleviates a lot of the story's tension and makes the plot and its pacing feel extremely awkward and unbalanced. The story of the second game was always going to be too big to tell in one modern season of TV, so I always knew it'd be split into more than one season. But for some reason, they chose to split this season up the exact same way as in the game. And I just have to ask, how on earth did so many people sign off on this being a good idea? Like, did the creative team not learn their lesson? This was one of the main reasons the second game is so controversial and divisive. I thought for sure this issue would have been addressed in the show, but instead, they leaned fully into it, and as a result, it kind of makes the whole thing feel more formulaic. They had the opportunity to make a really smart and cool fix to make the story of the game leagues better, and they just didn't. It's really strange. The cliffhanger the season ends on just leaves me wanting more from what we've already gotten, not necessarily wanting more from what's to come. I really don't know how they're going to resolve this issue going forward, but I'm still optimistic they can pull something interesting off. Because, all things considered, Season 2 on the whole is just about as good as it could have been while still working within that arbitrary narrative structure. I like nearly every change Season 2 makes to the source material. It rarely reaches the highs of Season 1, and it occasionally dips below the lows, but the good parts that are here are really good. It takes confusing and dissonant elements of the game's story and develops them in ways that are a lot more thematically satisfying and makes everything feel more cohesive. Obviously, it's not perfect, far from it in fact. There's a handful of fundamentally contrived parts of the game's plot that go unchanged, there's still some pacing issues, and the show's writing is less subtle this time around, but there's still a lot here that works that people just are not acknowledging. Except for that last episode. The last episode is straight donkey ass, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let's go over everything that works. I cannot express enough just how nice it is to see so many characters who showed potential in the game actually become fully developed people. Jesse feels like he has a purpose now. Seth has new layers added to him. Dina has an actual personality and backstory and motivation now. And this show is so well cast, it's crazy. Pedro Pascal stands out, obviously. Caitlin Dever is a great actress, and I love the direction she's going with Abby. And Gabriel Luna just is Tommy for me. He embodies the role so well. Not to mention Jeffrey Wright. He's one of my favorite actors, and I love how Isaac is being developed. I'm excited to see what more they do with him. Bella Ramsey is catching a lot of flack for their role in Season 2, and I'll talk more about them in a second, but I really want to emphasize just how well acted this show is. Literally everyone is firing on all cylinders, and even when the writing occasionally isn't up to snuff, each actor handles the material with so much care and nuance that it's usually pretty forgivable, at least for me. All of the new side characters in Jackson are great and feel like they have good reason to be there. I hope they'll be sticking around for future seasons. And it's nice to see more of the Jackson community as a whole. It feels more developed and makes the Infected Siege in Episode 2 feel like there's actually something at stake. Which, by the way, holy shit, what a set of sequences, dude. I really like how the Infected are utilized in this season. Not only do they feel like more of an active threat, but introducing the idea that they're slowly evolving and becoming smarter is a super clever way to incorporate the new Infected variants. In the second game, the new variants just sorta show up for no good story reason. But if the show continues to develop this theme, I could see them doing some really interesting stuff with the ethics of how the Infected are handled in future seasons. Also, not for nothing, but I like how the show is incorporating some actual gameplay elements now. The first season acted like it was kind of embarrassed about being adapted from a video game, so it was nice to see this season throw in some direct references to the game. The bottle throwing, Dina's hearing ability, sneaking through the tall grass, even some of the cinematography mimicking player camera controls. I don't know, it was a fun thing to pick up on. On a more episodic basis, I love how Episode 1 sets up the new normal for this world and these characters. I appreciate them showing Ellie's story beats more sequentially in this season. Seeing the New Year's dance that kicks off a lot of the drama at the top of the story now reframes how many scenes throughout the rest of the season play out, and I think it works for the best in the new TV format. Episode 2 would rock for the siege scenes alone, but more importantly, Joel's death is handled with more weight and care for the smaller details than in the game. I was really glad to see the writers took all the criticism of the original scene to heart and were able to improve it for the show. Extremely affecting stuff. I wasn't sure how well this show was going to fare without Joel being active in the story, but Episode 3 is as good as anything before it because of how well it builds up the supporting cast of characters in the Jackson settlement. I still think it's kind of silly that Dina and Ellie basically just teleport to Seattle when the journey being more important than the destination was kind of one of the major points of the first game, but this is a problem that originates with the second game. So while I wish the show hadn't made that choice, it's kind of hard to dock it much for that when it's not even really its fault. And there are enough moments of reflection and contemplation throughout the rest of this episode that I'm not all too mad about it. Also, it's great to see the Seraphites so early into the season. Their presence in the game often felt pretty disconnected from everything, especially from Ellie's storyline, so it's nice this season took some of the necessary steps to make them an intimidating presence as early as possible. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they get expanded on in the next season. Episode 4 and 5 kind of blend together and are probably the most boring this season gets. They're not bad, just not as good as everything else. The infected scenes here are kinda goofy. Jesse's rescue is the most extreme deus ex machina I've ever seen, and most clearly, the pacing gets all messed up because it just becomes the Ellie and Dina show for a while. They just don't carry the same screen presence as Joel and Ellie did in the first season. Their chemistry is really tender and cute, but their dynamic just isn't as engaging to watch. But again, that's not to say it's all bad. It's so nice to actually hear Dina develop and speak her mind where, at this point in the game, she's just a block of wood. And call me cringe all you want, but it's nice to see that these two characters who are supposed to be in love actually care about each other, even when under extreme circumstances. It's sweet, goddammit, have a heart. Season 2 peaks at episode 6, but to properly discuss it, we first need to talk more about Bella Ramsey. There was a lot of hubbub before this season came out about their character not being recast. Bella Ramsey isn't nearly as mature as Ellie as portrayed in the second game, so a lot of people were worried that they wouldn't be able to believably pull off the radical changes her character undergoes while keeping Bella cast in this role. So how did the showrunners decide to tackle this issue? By completely changing Ellie's characterization. And I think it totally works. With caveats. Let me explain. Since Season 1, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have been taking a different approach to how these characters are portrayed from game to show. Where books involve active engagement and visual content consumption tends to be more passive, video games mix these two forms of engagement into one experience. So while the passive watching of a story in a video game can no doubt be engaging, it's the active playing of the game that allows the story to happen and become real for the player. This relationship to the screen encourages a player to more actively reflect one's emotions onto the roles they play within a game than one would with the simple passive watching of a movie. In the first Last of Us, the player actually does a lot of legwork in getting Joel and Ellie to care for one another. And while the game is obviously well written in its own right, that dynamic isn't really possible to recreate in a non-interactive format like television. As a result, the show has to adapt how these two interact with each other. Joel is characterized as a lot more emotionally vulnerable. Where in the game he's a grizzled survivor driven by his repressed traumatic experiences, in the show he's a man on the brink of collapse who only realizes how desperate he is when he finds someone who gives his life meaning again. A lot of this characterization can be implied about Joel when you play as him because the player is made to actively feel his feelings in gameplay. But to get this across in the passive viewing of a TV show, this vulnerability has to be brought to the forefront, to be visually seen on screen. In the final episode of Season 1, Joel and Ellie straight up tell each other exactly how they feel for one another, and where this kind of thing would come off as extremely ham-fisted in the game, it works wonders for these versions of the characters in the show. It's a powerful switch, one that was very obviously intentional to better work within the confines of its new format limitations. And while it may not be as successful all around, I'd argue the showrunners have done the exact same thing with Ellie in Season 2. If you ask me, the story of The Last of Us Part 2 is an egregious assassination of Ellie's character. Not in the way that I'm upset by her actions, but in the way that her motivation is extremely scattershot and inconsistent. Ellie makes decisions in the second game that make absolutely no sense based upon how she's built up as a character in the first game. While I don't agree with all of their points, Nakey Jakey and Macabre Storytelling have great videos that dive into this inconsistency better than I could. But all that to say, Ellie will slay dozens of random people during gameplay segments in the most violent ways imaginable and feel absolutely nothing. But if she kills someone in a cutscene, she's emotionally devastated. She will risk the lives of everyone she loves to travel across the country, twice, to hunt down her greatest enemy, only to spare her at the last possible second for a completely arbitrary reason. The second game puts the message it's trying to push, how toxic and cyclical revenge can be, above how the characters of the first game should act, and it all just comes off as really confusing and antithetical to its own message. Season 2 takes Ellie's contradictory story of revenge from the second game and transforms it into a much more personal story of loss and trauma. Where Ellie in Part 2 is brutal, ruthless, and trigger-happy by default, the show's version of Ellie isn't. Since Season 1, she's been built up as someone a lot less independent, more vulnerable, and while she definitely has a violent side, she only pulls the trigger when she's scared or when she absolutely has to. Every speck of blood on her hands in both seasons rocks her to her core. Can you really imagine this version of Ellie pulling off the over-the-top, bloodthirsty, Punisher-like kills that Ellie in the game does? No, it wouldn't feel right. It would be goofy as shit. So the show doesn't do that. The showrunners use Bella Ramsey's punky demeanor and weak physical stature to their advantage, changing how she's characterized to make more sense for this version of the story. This version of Ellie is an angsty teenager. She's a loose cannon because of the messy relationship with the one person she tried to trust. She's a bit of a brat, one who thought she knew what her life was supposed to look like, and is now frustrated with what it turned out to be.
Big mood.
She may not be Ellie from the game, but she is consistent, something that the game very much was not. Each of her actions compound to the point where she's basically digging her own grave through her carelessness, and she doesn't even know it. And while those themes tried to be addressed in the game, Ellie's new characterization makes it feel a lot more realized here. Sure, at times she's kind of annoying, but I wouldn't expect a character in her circumstances to act any other way. And this all leads in to the porch scene in episode 6. I love how Ellie confronts Joel in this moment. At this point in time, she's already officially known for nearly a year that he lied to her about the hospital incident. She just hasn't known the specifics of what exactly happened. And as soon as Joel tells her exactly what happens, as angry as she is for finally learning the truth, once he explains himself, she immediately understands why he did what he did. Whether she can fully admit it to herself or not, some part of her has known since confronting him at the end of season 1 that he has been lying to her this whole time. And she's gone along with the lie. Because he loves her, and she loves him. So when she offers her forgiveness as soon as she learns the truth, it's her admitting that she realizes she's just as culpable as he is. This makes Joel dying the next day all the more tragic, because for the first time since before the hospital, for only a fleeting moment, they were finally on the same page again. This interaction on the porch is why Ellie has acted the way she has the whole season. With her new characterization, she's acting out in the only way she knows how. The people complaining about how it doesn't line up with the game, I don't think fully understand why the version of this scene in the game was problematic in the first place. This was a brilliant adaptational decision to make, and really made the whole season worth it in my opinion. This is the last season before the final episode. I was so pumped to see what was coming next. And I can't tell you how much it hurt that one of the best episodes of the whole show was immediately followed up with by far the worst. It shouldn't have been possible to fumble the ending this badly, but holy shit, does the final episode of Season 2 not stick the landing. This isn't the worst episode of television ever aired, but compared to how I'd rate every other episode of the series, it really stands out. The writing of Season 2's last episode is so off compared to the rest of the series that I'm left kinda baffled. The pacing is terrible, the dialogue is campy, and the beginning of the war between the WLF and the Seraphites isn't well explained enough for people who haven't already played the game. I know that'll be expanded upon in the next season, but as is, it just muddies the already confusing action of the episode. Ellie washing up on the Seraphite Island is a useless distraction that comes off as totally contrived and slows everything down. And the goofy-ass cutaway cliffhanger is so cheesy. But the most obvious issue with this episode is that it doesn't fall in line with everything that's been set up so far. For whatever reason, just for this episode, they basically made Ellie a one-to-one copy of her game counterpart. While there are glimpses of her new characterization here and there, she feels like an entirely different character in the final episode because she's being written like Ellie from the game. But that's not the Ellie of the show. She is stupidly inconsistent from scene to scene. She's brattier than she's ever been, more selfish than she's ever been, and more dumb than she's ever been. Who the hell is this Ellie? It's all so laughable. None of it comes off as natural, and it's all beyond contrived. It's bad. It leaves such a bad taste in my mouth that it makes everything that came before it look worse. And that is a real shame, because as much as I like the rest of the season, it's hard to defend the ending. I genuinely have no idea what they were thinking. I totally understand people not really vibing with Season 2, even if I think the hate is overblown. I think Season 3 can write itself out of this hole, but I hope the showrunners take into consideration just how disliked parts of this new season were so they can improve on things going forward. The Last of Us has so much potential as a property, and the last thing I want it to devolve into is Walking Dead levels of desperate depravity. All I can do in the meantime is hope and pray the next season addresses some of these criticisms. Knowing what comes next in the game, I won't deny I'm a little worried, but Season 1 and the rest of Season 2 are so good that I'm hopeful and optimistic that they'll figure it out. This video wasn't supposed to be this long, but I had a lot more to say about this than I realized. If you hated Season 2, can't say I blame you, but I hope I was able to provide a different opinion that may make you reconsider some of the show's strengths. Expect more videos like this from me coming sometime soon. Yeah, take care, y'all.